Okay, so in this on this key is section 2.8 part 3. You'll notice that these equations of circles, these are written in general form. So general form is where you have the individual terms on one side and zero on the other. So what you want to do is write it in standard form. And remember, standard form is this. So it's x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equal r squared. All right, and so what you have to do here is complete the square. So you're going to have to complete the square twice on the variable x's and on the variable y's. Okay, now the first step when completing the square, when changing this general form to standard form, first thing you have to do is bring the constant to the other side. So we're going to rewrite this as, and I'm going to go ahead and group the x's and group the y's together. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x together. And then remember, at some point, you're going to be completing the square. So you're going to be rewriting this right here as a binomial squared. So you're going to have to add something to these two terms to get a binomial squared. So I'm going to go ahead and put that at this point. So I'm completing the square and the x's. When I do that, I'm going to be adding a number here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the y's. So I'm going to say y squared plus, so minus 2y plus some number, and that's going to equal negative 1. Okay? So I brought the 1 over, get negative 1. So remember, you're completing the square and the x's, so you're going to add a number to both sides. Whatever you add here, you're going to add here. And you're going to complete the square and the y's, and whatever you add here, you're going to add here. Okay? Alright, so to complete the square and the x's, this is what you do. In both cases here, the coefficients of x squared and y squared are 1. So if it wasn't 1, you'd have to divide every term by that number on both sides. But these are 1, so we're not even going to worry about that part. So notice that these are 1s now. So the coefficient of x squared and y squared are 1. So then the next step is to take the coefficient of x, which is a positive 6, divide by 2, and you get 3. Then you take that 3 and you square it, and you get 9. And that's what you add here, and that's what you add here. So you add 9 to both sides. Now, if you're doing this correctly, this right here should now be written as a binomial squared, and it is. It's going to be x plus 3 squared. X plus 3 times x plus 3 is this. All right, now let's do the y's. So I take the coefficient of y, which is negative 2, and I divide by 2. It's always divide by 2, and I get negative 1. Then I take that negative 1 and I square it, and negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. And that's what I add to both sides, just like this. What you do one side, you do the other. Now remember, this is plus, so if I'm doing this correctly now, this right here should now be a binomial squared. And it is. Now make sure you factor correctly. It's not x plus 1, but it's x minus 1 because of this middle term being negative. And then that's going to equal negative 1 plus 9 plus 1 is just 9. All right, so there's your standard form. That's your standard form. And now the center from your standard form is going to be negative 3, positive 1. Based on what we did in the previous lesson, in the previous worksheet. So remember, x minus a negative 3, remember what we did. Just the mistake is going to be that people are going to, that you may say positive 3, negative 1, and it's not. So remember, it's got to look like this, x minus a negative 3. So this is your h. And then x minus 1 is already x minus. So this right here is your k. That's the y-coordinate of your center, and that's the x-coordinate of your center. Okay, so there's the standard form right here. From that standard form, you can determine the center and the radius. So the center would be negative 3, comma 1. The radius, remember, will be the square root of 9, which is 3. All right, and so to graph it, you're going to graph the center first. So negative 3, 1 is here. And from that center, you're going to go 3 units all the way around. So you're going to go 3 units to the right, 3 units up, 3 units to the left, and then 3 units down, and just connect the dots using a circle. So there's your circle. Now they asked you for the domain and range. I'm just informing you, if they asked you for the domain and range, remember the domain, they didn't ask you this, but the domain would be from, just to remind you, domain. So remember, you go from left to right along the x-axis. So I'm starting at -4. Oops, sorry, that's -6. I'm starting at -6 with the bracket, not parentheses. Remember, negatives. All these are points on the graph. They're all points on the graph. So -6 has to be in the domain, all the way to this x coordinate, which is 0. And then the range. Now, I didn't ask you this. I'm just informing you, just to remind you. And then the range would be from -2 all the way to +4 with brackets. Okay? All right. Now, let's do the next one. So, again, this is general form. You want to put it in standard form. So you will make it look something like this. Although when you rewrite it, make sure you don't leave it as x minus -3. Don't say x minus -3. That's supposed to be x plus 3. You need to rewrite as x plus 3. Okay, so I'm going to put the x coordinates, the x terms together. So I'm going to say x squared minus 14x plus some number, plus, and then the y squared plus 4y plus some number, and that's going to equal, and you bring you subtract 49 from both sides, and so it's going to equal -49. All right. Now, let's complete the square on the x's. So I'm going to take the coefficient of x, which is -14, divide by 2, and I get -7. Then I take -7 squared, and I get 49. And so that's what you add to both sides. What you do here, you do here. Now, if you're doing this correctly, this trinomial here should now be a binomial squared, and it is, will be x minus 7 squared. Okay, over here, you're going to take the coefficient of y, which is 4, divide by 2, and so they get 2. Then you square 2, and you get 4. And that's what you add to both sides. And again, if you're doing this correctly, that's going to be plus here, this should now be a binomial squared, and it is, will be y plus 2 squared, equal, and then over here you just get a 4. -49 plus 49 plus 4 is just 4. So there's your standard form. And so your center, you got to be careful. Don't say it's -7, 2. It is a +7 and a -2, because remember it's y minus a -2. So that's a -2. So your center is 7, -2, and the radius is the square root of 4, which is just 2. All right, so you're going to graph plot the center. So 7, -2 is right here. And then you're going to go 2 units to the right, 2 units up, 2 units to the left, 2 units down. And then you just connect the dots, and there's your circle. All right, and that's all you had to do here. So that's the key to section 2.8, part 3.